Thank you. Okay, so this evening, I wanted to return a little bit and go further with some of the themes that we talked about when we were together 2 weeks ago, but it'll all be new for those who weren't here. So there's no story being continued. And the idea is basically, what is the Baha'i faith and how does it relate to humanity's unfolding journey? And when I talk about humanity's unfolding journey, I really mean the whole kit and caboodle. Why are we here? What is the purpose of this life? Where are we going? And in order to kind of tell that story, I have to bring in one of the major players in this story, which is God, right? Because that word comes up in a lot of contexts and for a lot of people. And I picked a puzzle background because it's so hard to really even say what God is. There was a time in my life when I was studying a lot of other different writings, and they were written by atheists. And I realized as I was reading these books, and they were very profoundly spiritually moving to me, that even though a person may say they disbelieve in God, it's not very difficult for me to find a thing in life, their life, that touches them the way that I feel God touching me. And then I discover that this is human beings connecting with sort of a primal spiritual reality that they may or may not have the same name for that I do. They may not, have the structure of religion around their experience with that thing. But I think it's part of the fundamental human relationship with life that we have these experiences that, I can appreciate people not wanting to put labels on them. I can appreciate when a person says they don't believe in God, if the God they don't believe in is the, societally packaged up idea of God that often gets handed down to us in childhood. So when I say God, I really don't even know what I'm referring to. In the Baha'i Faith, God is described as an unknowable entity, an unknowable essence that human minds will never be able to conceive or approach. And so there's another figure in our sort of spiritual landscape, which is the manifestations of God. And they're so crucial to this relationship that we have with our Creator that I wanted to just spend some time talking about them. But as I was thinking about God, I realized God's not the only thing in our lives which is omnipresent, everywhere. No one understands it, yet our lives and everything we know completely depends upon it. For example, time, right? Time has all of those attributes. And one of my favorite quotes is from St. Augustine. He said, if you ask me what time is, I don't know. But if you don't ask me, I know exactly what it is, right? We're actually, as human beings in this reality we inhabit, we're used to having very intimate and familiar relationships with powers and forces that are totally beyond our conception or understanding. We have no idea why life exists, where the universe came from. It's like, it's almost filled with mystery, this life that we live. And so to me, the manifestations of God come and they try to give us some information about that mystery. And when doing so, they use words almost as symbols to refer to aspects of this experience. But still, even with those words, we don't learn who God is, but we can learn how we might relate to him. So the manifestations of God, also known sometimes as prophets or messengers of God. And one thing that makes a manifestation of God unique among other human beings is that their station, their spiritual station, is such that it's not that what they say is true, it's that what they say is truth. And all other truth is measured against their measure. I remember the day when that finally clicked in my head. It was 1996. I mean, it just blew me away because I was reading this book from Baha'u'llah called The Book of Certitude. And I was like, every single paragraph, my mind was going, yeah, but but what about this? I was just sort of like carrying on this continual argument in my head because I realized I was trying to make all of his words okay. I was trying to make all of his reasoning fit with what I had grown up to understand life to be. And it was in that one moment where I was like, oh my gosh, these words that I'm reading, what if they're not just true? What if this is truth? What if he's educating me about the nature of reality? And so everything else that I had been brought up with, kind of in a way, I was defending it just because I was handed it when I was a kid, before I really had a lot of rational judgment to accept or reject things. So I had been brought up with this sort of set of belief structures. And now here I am reading the words of this messenger of God. And I'm using those belief structures to say, oh, maybe this is right, maybe this is wrong. But One of the things that we deal with, of course, is that over time, we've had many of these messengers of God, and they don't all seem to be saying the exact same thing. And so it creates these very difficult to resolve challenges in understanding who they each are in relationship one to the other. And I think that a part of why that happens is that we have to understand how we, as conscious beings, as human beings, how we relate to this capital T truth that they're trying to bring us. And so that's what I want to share a little story about who the manifestations of God are and how they relate to us. So this is a story that was told by someone who visited Baha'u'llah in Akka, Israel, when he was imprisoned there. And this picture is a picture of the prison where Baha'u'llah was interred, where he spent the first 2 years of his time in the city of Akka. And so this person was named Janab Muhammad Qoli Khan Nakhai. He was an influential and rich local man, and he believed in Baha'u'llah. He lived in a town called Khusef, which is part of Birjan. As a result of his accepting the faith, most of his relatives also became Baha'is, and he decided he wanted to go on a pilgrimage to Akka and attain the presence of Baha'u'llah. And so on his first and second visit to Baha'u'llah, he was accompanied by other pilgrims. But when he returned to the pilgrim house, and this is actually a picture of the pilgrim house that he might have been in at that time, he thought to himself that he had borne the hardships and difficulties of this long journey that had lasted 6 months because they had to walk there from Iran to Israel, hoping to witness some kind of extraordinary divine event, this being a manifestation of God after all. But he saw in Baha'u'llah a man like others, speaking and giving instructions similar to other men. There's perhaps nothing extraordinary or miraculous here, he thought. He was immersed in these thoughts when on the third day of their visit, one of the servants came and informed him that Baha'u'llah wanted to see him alone and unaccompanied. He immediately went to the presence of the Blessed Beauty, and as he lifted the curtain and entered his room, he bowed and instantly saw the Blessed Beauty as an incredibly bright and dazzling light. And this title, Blessed Beauty, is one of the ways that Baha'u'llah is referred to. So intense was his experience of this light that he fell to the floor and lost consciousness. All that he recalled is Baha'u'llah saying, Fi aman Allah, which means go in God's safekeeping. The servants were able to drag him to the corridor and subsequently brought him to the pilgrim house. He could not eat or sleep for 2 days after the event, and he was conscious of Baha'u'llah's overwhelming presence everywhere. This is a picture of the seawall at the city of Akka. This is where Baha'u'llah entered the city when he first arrived. He kept on telling the other pilgrims that he is here with us. His fellow pilgrims grew tired of this and asked Abdul Baha for help. Abdul Baha was Baha'u'llah's son. After a couple of days, the servant came back again and took him back to Baha'u'llah's presence. When he attained his presence, Baha'u'llah poured forth loving kindness and gracious utterances and bade the Janab to be seated. Then Baha'u'llah said to him, Janab Muhammad Qoli Khan, the manifestations of the divine essence are forced to appear in human attire and clothes. If their true being, that which is behind the veil of concealment, were to be revealed, then all humanity, like your good self, will lose consciousness and swoon away to the realm of the unconscious. Then Baha'u'llah went on, do you know how parrots are taught to speak? The Janab bowed and said, I do not know. So Baha'u'llah explained, the parrot owners have a parrot within a cage. Then they bring a big mirror in front of the cage, and a man hides himself behind the mirror and starts repeating words and phrases. The parrot sees that there is another parrot identical to itself talking in the cage, reflected in the mirror. And imagining that it is another parrot that is doing the talking, it too starts mimicking and learns to speak. Now, if the person who is actually behind the mirror were to reveal themselves from the start, then the parrot would never learn to speak. It is thus that the manifestations of the divine being should come into the world in human form and attire, so that they will not frighten mankind with their awesome being. And in one of Baha'u'llah's writings, The Hidden Words, he says this, O Son of Beauty, by my spirit and by my favor, by my mercy and by my beauty. All that I have revealed unto thee with the tongue of power, and have written for thee with the pen of might, hath been in accordance with thy capacity and understanding, not with my state and the melody of my voice. So there's this idea of a reality which is so all-encompassing and immense, but in order for that reality to have a healthy, like salubrious impact on human reality, it needs to be received by that human reality in a condition and in a manner that it can accept. So even in this picture, which of course, this is absolutely not to scale, right? The earth here would be 1 pixel if this was to scale. But even the earth, all of the plants in the early morning, they slowly open up to receive the sun's light, because if the light were just to jump into the middle of the sky and shine with the afternoon intensity immediately, it would burn a lot of those morning plants. And so human beings need to just evolve into an ever greater ability to accept and receive this energy. And one of the analogies that I've found in the Baha'i writings that I really like to sort of convey how these manifestations of God associate with this gradual unveiling is the idea of mirrors reflecting the light of the sun. And we used this metaphor 2 weeks ago. I drew this, I tried my best. Anyway, so in this picture, each one of these mirrors is like one of these messengers of God coming at a different time in the past. And they come about every 500 to 1,000 years, we're told in the Baha'i writings. And these are the times when civilization just gets a massive infusion of this spiritual energy and is lifted up at each stage to a higher and higher level of maturity and evolution. Like the whole earth is transformed by the appearance of these beings. But when the sun manifests itself in the mirror, it depends on what time of day it is, what you're going to see reflected from that mirror. So in the very, very early morning, you see that first ray appearing over the horizon. And even though that adds a glowing light to the sky, you don't see the sun. Like you would have, if that's all you ever saw, you would have no sense of what the sun was. But as the sun starts to grow, it starts to rise up, the light changes color in the sky. There was this place in Virginia I used to go to a few times for dawn prayers. And I was very, very young and very, I guess, overzealous about dawn prayers at that time. So I would wake up at 4 a.m. to go to this spot near the river so that I could sit there and watch from the absolute black to when the sun would rise. So I got to see all these different stages as I was saying prayers by this river. And so the sky is getting brighter, the color is changing, and then you start seeing the edge of the sun starting to come over the horizon. And when it's first coming over the horizon, you can even look at it, right? I mean, you're not supposed to, but you can actually see it because the intensity hasn't gotten so strong yet. But as it gets higher and higher, it starts becoming representative of really what the sun is and what the sun is capable of. And so in this book, the Book of Certitude, one of Baha'u'llah's great works about the history of religion in the world, he tells us this scheme of progressive revelation of each messenger of God coming to the earth and introducing these ideas and this infusion of spiritual energy to humanity. But the humanity he introduces it to is not the same each time. That's why the sun is growing slowly over the horizon, because the early stages of humanity could only grasp small concepts like your tribe should be united, before the concept that your city should be united, before that your nation should be united. And now with Baha'u'llah, he's telling us the entire earth has to become as one family. How that message would have had no meaning back 2,000 years ago when there was no entire earth in anyone's conception. And so because the sun appeared in this, I'm not going to say lesser form, but just less evident form, the way that they spoke, the teachings that they revealed, the laws that they gave, they were appropriate for that setting and for that time. And so after we come to today, we now have this perspective where we can look back over the last 2,000, 4,000, 6,000 years at all of these religions, and we think how different they appear to one another. How, each one has a different focus. Like in Christianity, they focus very much on the person and the example of Christ, Whereas in Islam, they very much do not focus on the person of Muhammad, because Muhammad is a messenger. He brought the word of God, and your focus should be on God and the word of God. So the emphasis and the understanding and where people place their focus, it differs. But what Baha'u'llah tells us is that the essential truth, that which underlies their messages, is not only connected, it is one and the same. He even calls it the changeless faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future. And this is always going to keep happening. Humanity is going to continue to receive these emanations from the divine Son, and they will continue to help us grow and evolve. So in one of his writings, Baha'u'llah clarifies to say, were any of the all-embracing manifestations of God to declare, I am God, he verily speaketh the truth, and no doubt attacheth thereto. For it hath been repeatedly demonstrated that through their revelation, their attributes and names, the revelation of God, his names and his attributes are made manifest in the world. You know, the mirror, who has the sun shining inside of it, it could rightly say, I am a mirror, but it could also say, I am the sun. And it would be right in both those respects. Before I go any further, I just want to pause, give that a moment, and see if anyone has any thoughts or things they would like to contribute.
Ask if anybody has any thoughts.
If not, that's okay. It can just be a pause. Well, then let me look at how human beings receive these messengers. So the way that humans interact with the reality around us is that I'm going to use this beautifully hand-drawn tree as a stand-in for reality, divine reality. And here we appear on the scene. But in order for us to have an experience of or a relationship with this divine reality, there needs to be a medium, something that communicates it to us. So in this case, it's the light. When I'm in my backyard, we have a lot of trees in our backyard. When I'm looking at the tree and I'm seeing the tree, I'm experiencing the tree, one could say, but I never take my eyeball and place it up on the tree, right? My interaction with the tree in that sense is only through that light. And that light is coming from a source. I'm not looking straight at the source. I'm seeing that source as it has reflected from the tree and made the tree visible to me. So this is like the messengers of God acting as that intermediary between the divine reality and us so that we can have an experience of it. In the Baha'i writings, it says that had the messengers of God never come, humanity would never have evolved above its animal and material condition. That all of the philosophical ideas that we have about virtue and good and evil, they could be tracked back through time to some manifestation of God who brought that idea to us. And so when we look at that tree through the medium of the light, we start to form an idea of a tree. You know, we see the tree, and now in my mind, I have this replication of the tree. I see it in my head rather than seeing it in reality. And when I do that, I produce an idea of a tree. And depending on who you are, and I know there were people here who said they were nature lovers, depending on who you are, you may hold the tree, the physical tree in front of you, to be more real, or the idea to be more real. Like there are people that when they see something, oh, that's a tree, and they just move on. And they don't have any more experience of the tree than that 100th of a second it took them to recognize it. And then other people will think, wow, each tree is a unique and individual being, and they really want to spend some time to experience it. It's a different orientation. But in the same way with the manifestations of God, they give us this message in order to introduce us to the divine reality. And when we read that message, we form an idea of what the divine reality is from that message. Through our understanding, through our interpretation, through the customs that we build around observing and making sacred that divine reality. And when we begin to hold the idea as more real than the thing that was being introduced to us, that's when it can be threatened. And when the next messenger of God comes, and he comes to give us new truth, our mind is like, as Christ puts it, an old wineskin, and the new wine can't fit. It's just going to burst it. So this is what human beings have done through time. And I think why, if you ask me, from what I've read from this book describing progressive revelation, that this is why human beings have not only misunderstood each messenger of God as he has come, but also rejected them to the point of exiling them or even putting them to death. Because they were prophesied to come. They came, they announced themselves as fulfilling that prophecy. But the people that they came to said, you don't fit my idea at all of what I think you're going to be. Therefore, you can't be true. Not even realizing that their own messenger of God was rejected for the same reason by the people who came before him. So the Baha'i Faith, as the latest in this series of world religions from the manifestations of God, some of the attributes of it, which are unique to this age, this stage of human maturation, is this understanding that all of the world's religions are part of the same unfolding design. This is the first time that a manifestation of God has really connected all of the dots for us throughout time. Even for manifestations we're not aware of, who existed elsewhere on the earth, but we don't have any report of their book or their people. We have no clergy in this faith. And with no clergy, also no interpretation that has authority. There is no way that I can say that something means X or Y and then argue it with my friend, Mr. Dunbar, to say, no, you're wrong, I'm right. There's just no grounds for that. We believe also that science and religion serve the exact same truth. They should be not only compatible, they should be interlinked. The findings of science should uphold the principles of religion and vice versa. I believe it is even Abdul Baha saying that if science upends a religious belief, then the scientific evidence should be preferred. We also believe that human beings are inherently noble and infinite in spiritual potential, and this has not always been the belief of religious communities. We think that people are born good and they are good, and that goodness simply needs to be nurtured and developed and brought to the fore. Also, society, in the similar way, is only at the beginning of its development. I mean, for all the technological advances we have and for all the 14 versions of the iPhone that there have been, we have not even started to see what this world is going to become, especially when human beings begin to work together in harmony on large scales. And the other unique aspect to the Baha'i Faith is that the religious texts that we have were confirmed by their author. So in Islam, we have the privilege of having a written holy text. And it was written by the people who were with Muhammad at the time, memorizing and committing these words to memory. But it was after Muhammad's passing away that they were able to group together into a conclave and write these words together, write these words down on paper after they all agreed that they had remembered the same thing. Whereas in the Baha'i Faith, Baha'u'llah would often, in answer to questions, he would dictate the text in response. And as it was written by his secretary and then transcribed into a legible form, he himself would review that legible form and approve it. So we have not only writings that took place at the time of the author, they were confirmed by that author as well. And they're copious. There are over 100 volumes in Persian and Arabic of Baha'u'llah's writings on a vast array of subjects. So this slide intentionally left blank so that we can have a moment of discussion. Sue said it would be best to ask a leading question to prompt discussion, but I don't have a leading question in mind. Am I revealing the inner secrets, Sue?
I have a question. It's not a leading question, but I had never thought before we get the idea of the tree rather than the tree. And it might be a warped idea, or we get the idea from someone else, we're listening to their idea. Mm-hmm. And we formed the opinion, well, my mother said this was what the tree was about, so I believe her, so I'm going to believe this. And so over a lifetime, your idea of the tree gets very concrete, it's static.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
you're not willing to change because you have, this is what you know. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's true.
Wow, that's an idea of an idea.
Mhm.
I should add that to the picture.
Now, you explain things very well, John. You're doing a wonderful job.
Thanks, Emma.
You gave me a lot to think about. I'm like, wow.
Well, I have just a little bit more for you, but I wanted to see if anyone had anything they wanted to add. Go ahead, Brenda.
No, I wasn't going to say anything, but
Oh.
thank you. Yeah, no.
Well, Yvette's Yvette's comment reminded me of this story that I loved when I first heard it. Have you heard the story about the village in India that received a cow? So apparently there was this, Yasaides has heard me tell this story, I think at least once before, but apparently in a remote village in the mountains of India, so goes the story, there was a tribe of people that had never seen a cow. And a passing merchant thought, wow, wouldn't it be a great thing to introduce them to a cow because of all the good products and things that it can do? So he brought a cow to the village. And at first they were a little put off by it, big, stinky animal, very slow. But as he began to show them how to milk the cow, how to get the dairy products, how to turn it into other things, they started to realize, wow, this is basically a treasure on legs, well, all the things that this cow can do. And so they really took to the cow, and they used it for many years, venerated it, loved it. But at a certain point, it grew old and it passed away. And then in memory of all the things that this cow had done for the villagers, they erected a little statue of the cow, just a simple clay statue. But as the years went by and people would honor this statue, they would think, well, this should be a little bit more beautiful. So they would add a little bit of color, or they would add a little bit of gilding. They would make this statue of the cow more and more magnificent to match their memory of the cow. And now also you're going to have people that they weren't there when the cow was part of the village's life, but they received the idea of the cow from the people who had seen it, just as you were saying, Yvette. And these people now begin to praise the cow and worship the cow. So many years later, somebody else visiting the village sees the people praising this cow, and he thought, well, I know what they want. I'll go bring them another cow, right? That's exactly what they're going to be looking forward to. So he goes and he brings them the other cow, and you can guess what their reaction was. Everybody there is like, what the heck are you trying to do in desecrating our beliefs? You think that this filthy animal measures up in any way to this, icon that we've built our village around? And so to them, it was offensive, this idea of introducing the very animal whose attributes had led to their veneration. So I always think of that when I think of these ideas of ideas that we hand down, and we receive the veneration that our parents had. We learn to revere it the way that they did. But if that reference stops us from being able to receive the light that caused that reference initially, that's when it becomes a risky thing, and has been for humanity for so long. So I will go back. So speaking of humanity then, so these messengers of God, they come in order to unlock the potential of our own being. They kind of bring us a treasure map to find these gems that are hidden within our own reality. So Baha'u'llah writes, the great being saith, regard man as a mine rich in gems of inestimable value. Education can alone cause it to reveal its treasures and enable mankind to benefit therefrom. So this is the Baha'i view of human beings. Every single human being, without exception, is to be regarded as a mine rich in gems of inestimable value. It is simply education, and most pointedly, spiritual education, that will bring these gems to the surface. And this is a picture of the largest diamond mine in the world in Russia.
Oh,
Yeah, it's called Mir. I didn't know what diamond mines looked like until I looked up what is the biggest one. But it's this, I guess they burrow it out in these circles. So in the diamond mine, what they find are stones that look like this. I mean, this is a particularly large one, but this is what a diamond might look like if you just got it out of that mine one day with your pick and shovel. And so this is like us. We're like this, right? Where in this condition, we have the properties of stone. This is our mortal reality, our earthly reality. And the objective of the manifestations of God is to introduce us to the concept of this. And what this is it has both the properties of stone, but it also now has ethereal or spiritual qualities like beauty. So it combines now the two natures simply through refinement of the original stone. And what allows this refinement to take place is this acquisition of virtue through material education. And not the kind of education of just going to school, but and not of adding something to our reality, because the brilliant gem is at all times potential within the uncut stone. It simply has to be revealed to demonstrate its quality. So from a long time ago, and at least when I was growing up, I was, as a little kid, brought up with this sort of sense that virtue was a set of ethical restrictions that guarded my way into heaven. You know, you could get in or you could not get in based on how you had acted in your life. But I think that that is a somewhat outdated conception of virtue because it leads to judgment. And that's not what it's about. What it's about is that you're like a Stradivarius violin, and all you are seeking is to be played well. But to do that, you have to be in tune. Your strings have to be tightened enough. You have to be ready for the player to set his bow upon you. And that's virtue. Virtue is the unlocking of your inherent potential. In the world, we're really great at trying to unlock our material potential. We've become excellent at that. I mean, all these devices I mentioned. But Abdu'l-Baha, he gives us this little insight. He says, no wealth, prosperity, comfort, or ease in our material world can equal the wealth of a bird. For it has all the expanse of the fields and mountains for a dwelling place, all the seed and harvests for wealth and sustenance, and all the lands, villages, meadows, pastures, forests, and wilderness for possessions. Now, which is richer, this bird or the wealthiest of men? For no matter how many seeds that bird may gather up or give away, its wealth does not diminish. Then it is clear that the honor and exaltation of man cannot reside solely in material delights and earthly benefits. This material felicity is wholly secondary, while the exaltation of man resides primarily in such virtues and attainments as are the adornments of the human reality. And then he gives us this very beautiful list of what these treasures and adornments are. And it's all formatted in one big paragraph. So I broke it apart for you so you could see each one of these things that he lists out. And I'm not going to read them all to you, but he mentions such thing as heartfelt emotions, perceptions of the mind, discoveries of science, justice and equity, safeguarding the rights of others, love of truth under all conditions, and the education for all races and nations. This is the bounty and the wealth of human society. But how do you get there? How do you get a whole society transformed like this? Because that's the other thing that the manifestations of God bring. When they come, they bring two different things. One is their life and example and their writings, which is sort of the visible aspect to their bestowal. And in some cases, we have recorded what they exactly said. In some cases, we only have reports of what they said, and in some we have their writings. But the other thing that they bring, which is invisible, is this world transforming power, the power of their word. Because when they speak, it sets in motion a divine effect that must, in the fullness of time, have its impact on the whole of humankind. So one of the ways that you can see a messenger of God as apart from any other clever philosopher or poet is to just look at how their words have affected the whole world. I mean, you take Christ, right? His mission lasted for 3.5 years from the time that he began teaching the people to when he was put to death. He never wrote anything down, but his words were recorded. That's all it took, those 3.5 years, for his life to have affected all of the countries on the earth and millions, if not billions of people following his word and trying to apply his teachings to their life. There are other people in history who are really brilliant and who wrote a lot of great stuff like Aristotle, but despite all of their thought and all of the energy they put into communicating their ideas, and despite the fact that they even get taught in universities to all of the students, their impact is negligible compared to the impact of these holy teachers. So you will find in history these figures who have this as their greatest evidence, that their impact on the world was just immeasurably greater than the impact of even the most brilliant minds of their age. There was even a person that I learned about. I attended this course on the historicity of Jesus. So it was a Christian scholar who looked at who Christ was in a historical context. Like, what do we know from historical evidence, who he really was as a person? And one of the things he told us about is that he was largely rejected as being the Messiah at that time. But about 180 years later, another man came who was regarded as being the Messiah by the Jews at that time, because he outwardly manifested way more of the things that they were looking for in a prospective Messiah. He was a military leader. He was from a great Jewish family. He had all of these material signs that would fit him to that role. But it took me being in that class to even learn that this person existed. And that's the difference between him and a figure like Christ. So in keeping with this idea of bringing out the gem from the stone, another person whose quote I really like is from Michelangelo. So Michelangelo said, "The greatest artist has no conception which a single block of white marble does not potentially contain within its mass, but only a hand obedient to the mind can penetrate to this image." And then he says, "I saw the angel in the marble and carved until I set him free."
Wow.
So we start out this life, we are each of us a block of marble, and within us is every figure the mind can imagine. And the manifestations of God give us these teachings to find the angel in the marble, if we apply ourselves to set him free. And you know, the Baha'is are trying very much in this world that we have today to give a different model for how communities should raise up and direct their future. And I don't know if you've ever heard us or anyone mention, say, the Ruhi study circles, but the point of Ruhi really is what it is not only to build capacity in individuals to build up society, but it is to do so through a connection to the creative word. It's finding a way to marry these virtuous and moral teachings with that invisible, unseen power that I mentioned that comes from the messengers of God, that comes from their word. When you put these two things together, that is an incredibly potent force. And that's what makes that whole program so important to us. And then I just wanted to close with one quote from Aristotle. Since I just dissed him a few minutes ago, I'll at least give him, I'll give him one line. He said, "The simple truth is all things, but it is not any one of them." And so as a species, as a humanity, having this relationship to the manifestations of God, we are intended to find these beautiful ideas, these masterworks of truth in their writings. But anything that we fit in our minds, anything that we understand, any idea that we come to have a relationship with, that's just part of the truth. And we have to always be staying open and moving forward and exposing ourselves to more and more of the truth that they offer. So it always remains essential to keep the heart open and the mind ready for what is new. And that was what I had hoped to share.
I'm going to have to leave, but this was